So, thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to address all of you and to provide you with some of our thoughts about Africa and African markets. Now, all of you know about Olam today, or many of you would know about Olam today. We are still, relatively speaking, a young company. We are present across 16 product platforms, across 70 countries, all over the world. Africa today accounts for about 13% of our global turnover. But the topic that I've been asked to speak to you is something that's very close to our heart, because finally, for Olam, this is where it all began. We started in one country, which was Nigeria, selling to one market, which was India, and selling one particular commodity, which was cashews. From there, today, as you saw, we have diversified significantly. In Africa itself, from that one country, today we have grown and we are actually present in more than 25 countries. In all of those 25 countries, we are present in our key supply chain businesses. Additional to those supply chain businesses, we selectively do upstream across the continent, from coffee plantations in Southern Africa to palm plantations in Central Africa to rice plantations in West Africa. We are there in all of those. We are also present in more than 10 countries where we do downstream consumer packaged products, including edible oils, across the value chain. I want to talk to you about a bit about the risk of working in Africa, knowing where to play, when to play. Now, if one goes with gut instinct, often we think that these guys are the biggest risks in the market, the biggest, baddest animals in the jungle. But then, gut instinct is often wrong. So, we go to highly paid consultants who do a lot of research and tell us that, no, actually, it's this guy. And though he's a vegetarian, he kills far more people than the previous guy does. So he's the guy you have to be careful about. And then they tell us that if that's the risk, you see him, this is what you should do, right? But if you are like us and you spend a lot of time in these markets and you sort of understand where to play, when to play, and you are looking for good risk-adjusted returns, then you actually may end up finding what you're looking for. You may actually end up domesticating what people think is the most demanding, but the most return-intensive markets there are. So let's leave the animals aside and move on to some of the key, what I think are the important demand and supply factors. First, on the demand side, the top two are basically population pyramids for Africa in 2016 and 2026, 10 years hence. For comparison, I've just put Southern Asia. For Africa also, because we have limited amount of time, I've limited it to the countries of Western Africa. As you can see, the population pyramids there look almost identical. In other words, it will still be a very young continent 10 years hence, and at the same time, one of the fastest growing populations, which I have used an implied edible oil consumption of 3.3 million metric tons in 2016 and 4.3 in 2026. This is based on the American Heart Association's recommended dosage of edible oil per day. Obviously, Africa does not follow that because culturally, frying, especially frying in oils, is far more predominant. And then there are other factors on the demand side which we will get into after this. So, the likely markets are going to be much larger. What about the supply side? The other side factor, which is both a demand and a supply side factor, about which I will enumerate a bit more, is the rate of urbanization. In all of Africa, urbanization is growing significantly faster than the rate of population growth. It has the world's highest rate of urbanization. However, that is a mixed blessing. In sub-Saharan Africa, as the AFDB itself admits, the large proportion of urbanization is by low and unskilled youths migrating from rural areas to urban areas, which leads to basically large concentrations of slums. In fact, sub-Saharan Africa has the world's highest concentration of slums. The activities, the economic activities that they engage in, therefore, are primarily informal, they're survivalist, they're basic trading activities, again in the words of AFDB. So what does this mean? First, Obviously, if you denude the rural population of a country, you will have issues in the supply side going forward. If you look at the productivity, agricultural productivity in sub-Saharan Africa, the key driver is basically new land being cleared. Irrigation plays practically no role. And of course, one of the key factors which Africa is competitive in is labor. So if you remove the labor and you remove the ability to increase land area because you don't have young people to do it, what do you get? You get villages full of old farmers who therefore are also going to struggle to maintain productivity. In many studies that we have done in various commodities, there are actually areas where the average age of the farmer is 59. Very difficult to teach a 59-year-old farmer on improving productivity, especially if they're smallholder farmers. So from the supply side, this is an issue. Productivity has to rise significantly. Now, what happens on the demand side? Keep in mind, as I told you, that a large part of this migration is into slums. It's migration of young people. In other words, they're not going to do a lot of cooking. They don't have the time. They don't have the facilities. Most of the houses in those kind of areas will not even have kitchens. So what are they going to eat? They're going to move from rural areas where they are basically consuming homegrown cereals, homegrown poultry, homegrown meat, mutton, etc., to a situation where the biggest substitution is happening in street cooked food. So if you look at this particular chart, I think it's quite striking that in urban areas, 23% of total food intake is actually junk food, which is basically high fried foods, compared to just 14% in rural areas. So a few observations that one can make about this is that you will have new urban consumers who are going to be single, who are going to be young, who are going to do a limited amount of cooking, and who are going to buy foods that will help them sustain throughout the day, because a lot of the activities they do are quite strenuous. Walking around all day with a heavy cart on your head, selling small products in the heat is strenuous, right? Doing manual labor all day, strenuous. So they're going to look for food that tastes good, that fills full, and that provides you with a basic energy to go around your day, right? So they're going to go to the guys in the second box who are food service entrepreneurs, what in many parts of West Africa are called mamas. Ladies who bring enough flour, enough oil, enough sugar to last for a day. That's what they buy. They make produce with that. They sell it to these people. At the end of the day, they go home. The difference that they have between the cost of what the raw materials they've paid for and what they have earned is what they survive on. So you're talking of very, very, very basic food service entrepreneurs who are present in all key areas, in all key markets, around key institutions like schools, like other company canteens, etc., and they will be an alternative or the kitchen for these people. So that's one set of, a very important set of consumers in a lot of these countries in urban areas. Now, add to that family sizes are often quite large. So if you have a large family and if you have 4 kids who are going to go off, and you expect that one lady of the house has to cook, it's probably not going to happen. African women are also quite entrepreneurial. If you visited Africa, you will find these extremely sharp trading women in all of the markets, and you better make sure that you're ready to negotiate, because they will negotiate the hell out of you. But they do the work out of the family. So what do their kids do? They get pocket money to go and buy the junk food that we talked of in the previous slide, right? So that's the second kind of consumers that come around as a result. And even those mamas, when they do buy for the home, they will buy for large families, they will buy loose, they won't necessarily buy packed SKUs. The fourth observation in all of this is that governments today in Africa are becoming more conscious of health, of the healthiness and the well-being of their citizens. And as a result, there are now drives to make sure that minimum nutritional standards for all essential commodities is being made. Fortification of foods, whether it's oils, whether it's other commodities, is very important. Some countries have already implemented such legislation. Some countries will implement such legislation going forward in the near future. They also tend to be against a large informal sector, whether it's up in the farms or in the cities, for reasons to do with expanding the tax base, extracting revenues, etc. Finally, most of these countries want to limit imports. They want to encourage self-sufficiency. Food imports are a very, very large part of their bill. So if you look at the top 2 or 3 value in terms of imports, if you rank imports by value, things like rice, oil, flour, sugar come up very near the top. So through a mixture of duty structures, investment incentives, outright bans, they are trying to ensure that at least in essential commodities, their dependence on imports goes down. So this is sort of the milieu in which you will have to operate if you're present in Africa. So some likely trends which I believe will follow. Urbanization has the potential of significantly increasing both the demand as well as increasing a deficit in supply going forward. So imports, whether the governments want it or not, are going to be a major part of these markets. However, these governments, these countries will be extremely welcoming to anyone who is willing to invest in bridging that gap, who is willing to invest in increasing local production and, more importantly, as we saw, local productivity. On the demand side, while the intermediate trade instead of the food consumer is extremely important, and a lot of work and a lot of research, a lot of effort has to go into understanding their needs, their viability, and how well they are doing in business. If they do well, you will do well. If they don't, well, too bad. And finally, the nutritional issue, as that I have said, is going to play in. Now, there are significant projects, both self-funded as well as aid-funded, currently going on, where there are urban renewal efforts going on, urban infrastructure is being built, and skills, productivity, etc. of the younger working population is being addressed. As that happens over the next 5 to 10 years, and we are very confident that it will happen, expect a significant increase in the sophistication of demand. You will then probably see people asking for branded, packaged, other more modern formats being present. In some parts of West Africa, which are further down the curve, that's already there. In others, it's catching up and it's building up. So, as I said, for the near future, that's, these guys are your consumers, or these guys are your customers, and you have to address. Small point I'd like to make, the stuff that you see on the right, those balls of flour being fried in a lot of oil, these are basically a kind of donuts. They're called beignets in French West Africa. Now, if you're going to sell oil and flour and sugar to these guys, you have to make sure not only that it absorbs the least amount of oil while frying, but if I had a video, I could probably show you that it actually turns on its own in a certain period of time. If the thing does not turn, and the lady has to physically turn it, she's not going to buy your oil, or your flour, or your sugar, or whatever it is that you use out here. She doesn't know why it happens. She'll simply tell you that it doesn't work, sanavapa. So, these are the things that if we address, and there are many such things, that can really lead to a much deeper understanding of the African consumer, a much deeper understanding of what their habits are, what makes them tick, and therefore an improvement in our own bottom line and our own volume potential. So, how does one tap this potential? You have to build for the long term. Markets and communities will catch up. Things that we didn't think possible 10 years ago are today happening. The telecoms revolution, I mean, I remember having to stand in line to access internet in upcountry Central Africa 10 years back. And if when you reached and you tried to connect, you couldn't get a connection, you went back to the back of the line. So it took me 2 hours to send the reports that I had to send to Olam in Singapore. Today, I mean, you have 4G available in most of those same places, in most of those same locations. The change is coming and change catches up very fast. So build for the long term, build it right the first time, invest in building a deep understanding of markets, expect the expected, the unexpected, as I showed you with the hippo, and be resilient. For example, I think Olam's palm business in Gabon is something that can serve as a useful template here. As some of you may be aware, we were developing 100,000 hectares of palm oil plantation in Gabon. We have already planted 31,000 hectares, And very recently, we have just finished the RSPO certification of our mills, which has increased the total certified production by about 30%. Now, why? One, of course, is that this gives us access to various developed markets, but also because it's important to help governments in Africa grow sustainably. Why is that? The forest is their heritage. The high conservation value areas are their heritage. That's one part of it. The second part of it is a lot of these countries depend on donor aid, foreign aid, and the best way of helping them access that and continue to access that is to allow them to demonstrate sustainable development in which private companies like us have a key role to play. Plus, because it's our plantation, we will help ensure that the productivity gap is bridged. Not only are we developing our own plantations, but along with the government of Gabon, we are also involved in Project Grain, where we are bringing people back, young people, back to the land and ensuring that the best farming practices are being followed so that the employment issues are being resolved, the productivity issues are being resolved, and there is a strong small holding culture which continues to thrive and progress and prosper. So that's a small view of our plantations. And I thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.